Hello and welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond academic research and that may be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Aiden, and I'm a graphic designer for PhD Balance. Before going any further, I would like to pay respect and acknowledge that I occupy Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux nations. If you missed it, we are now pre-recording episodes before release. All episodes are still available via video on our PhD Balance YouTube channel and via audio on all major streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe on your chosen platform to get notifications about new episodes. Now, our topic today is personal and professional development in grad school, and I'm excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Sean Bittner. Sean holds a PhD in bioengineering and the Associate Certified Coach credential from the International Coaching Federation. His graduate research focused on 3D printing and biomaterials research, and he has a combined 6 years of writing and presentation consulting and leadership and career coaching experience. Sean currently serves as the director of Medical Technology Accelerator Program. We're so pleased to have you on Grad Chat to discuss your experiences, Sean. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I think this is a really fun topic because I think it's so common in grad school that we focus only on like professional development type things that are directly related to our research. But of course, professional development, there's more to that. And then personal development is so important as well. So why don't you explain a little bit more about the difference between personal and professional development?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest kind of difference for me is I'm classifying a professional development activity as something that is really either strictly or primarily geared towards this is something that's useful for my career, whether it makes me more technically knowledgeable or gives me some other skill, whether it's, again, a technical skill or like a workplace relational skill, some type of experience that makes me a stronger candidate and a stronger employee in my career. Personal development, I'm really seeing as something that's a little bit more along the line of something for you as an individual. I think the lines can be blurred. Certainly, there are things that kind of cross between them and mix and match just based on what your goals are at the time. But I think both are really important. And like you said, I think we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about personal development at all in grad school. And even on the professional development side, it's often very much geared towards professional development, specifically with relation to your research and your like specific niche in your PhD program, as opposed to kind of you as a broader individual.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really interesting. When I was thinking of like the difference between them, it was hard to like really put it into words. So thank you for that. When should people kind of start this professional and personal development? Is there really like a specific time to start, or is there more to it?
Yeah, with the disclaimer of like, don't freak out, as soon as possible. I think it doesn't have to be like, I want to separate it from this big like burden, right? I think sometimes there's the idea of, oh, I have to do this and do that, and it feels like this big weight. These things are really for you as a student, as a researcher, as a future career professional. And so when I say as soon as possible, I mean, I really would encourage people not to feel like they should wait until they're ready or until they have enough time or just until they hit some kind of somewhat subjective point, because that point may never come. I can promise you from starting grad school, you're never going to have more free time as the years go on in graduate school from when you start. At least that was certainly not my experience. And then I don't think anybody ever really feels ready to learn a new skill or put themselves out there in getting a new experience. But they can help you along the way. And I guess I'm bouncing all over the place a little bit here, but the more you get involved with doing these types of things outside of traditional research experience, they, in some cases, may lend themselves to additional things down that path. But you may never get to those additional second, third, fourth tier things if you don't start the first tier ones.
Great point. I love that. Before we get too far into like talking about the different
Yeah.
or like why it's important, etc., can you give like a few examples of what classifies as like a personal development or a professional development, just so we have like examples when
Yeah,
we're talking through these types of things?
sure. So I'll start with maybe some things that are exclusively personal and exclusively professional, and then kind of some that toe the line. Some personal development items. I think, you mentioned earlier I have a coaching certification. I was very blessed to be doing my grad program at a school that had a leadership coaching institute. I think leadership coaching itself is a professional development type skill with some personal involved, but the skills that you learn to become a coach, so learning a bit more about emotional intelligence and learning how to listen at a deeper level, learning how to give feedback effectively, those have professional uses, but I felt very much like they were first and foremost for me as a person.
Mhm.
I felt like I was becoming, a better person to work with, a better person to be partnered with, whether, in a
Excellent.
friendship or in my marriage. Like I felt like these things were good for me. Learning language, another personal development skill, can have professional uses, certainly. I, a few years ago, decided I wanted to start learning Italian. Just that's been an interest of mine. I don't have really an interest or need to use that professionally. It just was something I was excited about.
Yeah.
In terms of professional development skills, like I mentioned, there can be some really technically specific skills, learning a new software, learning to code. I know a lot of grad students, like that's a big thing now, is learning different programming languages to help with their research, learning how to use different instruments, but also some things that are a little bit further outside of research. SciComm is huge, learning how to communicate with people, learning how to distill science and research down that's digestible for everybody. One of the things that you mentioned in my intro was being a writing coach. I've been a writing coach for 4 years. That's something I had to kind of learn how to do on the fly. I
Yes.
realized, okay, this is an important skill that I don't think grad students necessarily get as much help as they could use in terms of writing, but also it's going to help me as a writer myself, right? I find that my writing has been astronomically better than when I first started, just because of coaching other people.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about it maybe in a few minutes where you can find those resources as well,
Yeah,
because I know it's different for all universities and everything, but
sure.
okay, I really appreciate you kind of outlining a few of these. So as we move forward, hopefully the listeners kind of have like a better idea of what we're talking about and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really overarching broad question, but why is personal development important? In your opinion? And maybe how it relates to how it has helped you. And you kind of touched on that, but like how has it shaped your ability to move forward in your career or your personal life?
Yeah, I think the point I want to go back to is just there are so many things about working in the professional world. I guess we'd call them soft skills, although that's not really super accurate.
Yeah, I was gonna say soft versus hard, and I was like, I don't really love that term because they're still so important. It shouldn't be like soft.
They're all skills,
but they're all skills, yeah. But I'm happy you mentioned that.
I think there was this perception. So I was, bioengineering for a PhD. I also got an engineering degree for my undergrad, and I think there was this kind of not stigma quite, but this belief of like it would like they're soft skills because it's okay if you don't have them. And that was just my personal experience. It was like, these are things that are nice to have, but we can kind of let it slide if you're really technically adept. And I'm just finding that that's simply not accurate. With the asterisk that like sometimes people with not as many of these soft skills do excel and have successful careers, and that's great. But the entry line of like you are basically qualified for being in any type of career profession. The baseline qualification is education, right? Like that doesn't mean anything for how you'll do at the job. It just means that you did the degree or the program or the certification required to be like the bare minimum qualified. And so I'm seeing personal development as like, how do I not just like be the baseline, but also thrive here and not just thrive here technically, but also as an individual. I know that, some of the listeners have maybe pretty significant differences in their experience before and after grad school, whether they went directly to grad school from undergrad or did a master's or went to work in industry. So there's kind of a wide range. I'm thinking most people can relate to being on a team with somebody who doesn't have, again, these soft skills or hasn't worked to develop them. It can be a challenge, but also there's not a great opportunity in grad school to build those like directly through your program. I didn't take any classes on how to be a team player. I didn't take any classes on how to have a candid conversation with a coworker, right? Like those are not things that are taught, but they're hugely important in your job.
Yeah, and you need to find other ways to do those. So did you like join clubs or what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I think I took the stereotypical approach of like, at the very beginning, I joined everything. I was involved in everything. I was like, oh yeah, I got to have a strong resume and here's all these things I'm going to do. And then I think, so I did a 5-year undergrad because I did a year's worth of internship co-op experience. When I got into the end of my junior and the beginning of my senior years, I was like, this is silly. Like this doesn't make any sense. Like I need to peel back a little bit
and
just
structure of like,
Well, and also I was doing things that I wasn't super interested in because I felt like I should do them. And I was like giving the bare minimum amount of effort. And I was like, this is not helpful to me and it's not helpful to them. And so I started to learn, I think a little bit too late, okay, I'm only really going to get something out of this if I like pare down the number of things I'm doing and actually invest time in them. So I went to grad school thinking, okay, I'm only going to get involved with things that I'm really passionate about, that I think are useful and good and helpful to other people. So I did, we'll talk about this, I think in a minute, but just, I did start on the like writing, coaching and consulting type work. There's a writing center at my university that employs undergrad and grad students to help other students and postdocs with their works. Yeah, it was huge for me, but I saw that as like, this is a quintessential example of, it's great for me. It helps me with my coaching ability. It helps me develop my own writing, frankly, but also provides a really important service to some students that maybe might otherwise not get it at all, but it's certainly not as convenient, right? I mean, there's a difference between, there is a center dedicated to doing only this, and you bring in whatever you want to talk about and show up to office hours and we'll see. I think office hours are hugely important, but I don't think all of the burden of educating on writing can be expected to fall on often a TA.
Yeah. Or also like a supervisor. I know my supervisor has, he has about 14 students under him. It's hard for him to be educating us on writing materials when there are other resources. He does give us some basics and everything and does editing on our work, but it's a lot of extra work for him. And so it's important that us as students take that responsibility as well to have these like soft skills and professional and personal development skills.
And that touches on, I think, a challenge that's maybe outside the scope of this conversation, but I think there is also something to be said for, I didn't learn how to write from my grad program. I really didn't.
Oh my God, neither.
And I don't say that disparagingly, I don't mean to be like down talking, but I really didn't. The feedback that I got for, hey, how do I write and format my thesis proposal? How do I write and format my thesis defense? How do I write my first paper? Was, oh, just ask the students the year above you in the lab. And I was like, that is not like a sustainable, for lack of a better word, it's not a sustainable business model, because like you're going to progressively lose students. I was very lucky when I joined. My lab had 16, 17 grad students in it. I was in a big lab. It's smaller now as students have graduated. But I couldn't imagine I'm coming in and I'm one of the 2 grad students and the 1 year above me is year 2. Like you, in many cases, haven't written a paper yet. So where do I go to learn that stuff?
Yeah, I got I did have a little bit of experience in my undergrad. There was like one paper I had to write, but
Cool.
most of my program graduated without having to write any type of paper.
Oh,
And then they
wild.
get into grad school. Yeah. And so
Oh, most
I'm,
of your undergrad paper. Okay.
yeah. So, yeah, it was my undergrad thesis.
Got it.
And then when we got to grad school, like everyone's like, I have never written a paper in my life. Like, how
Yeah.
do you format these things? How do you do this? And I'm very fortunate that my supervisor did do kind of like a rundown on how to format
Good.
things and stuff. And I have taken a course on like Word and everything like that. So but I have taken that responsibility on myself
Right.
to learn those professional development skills, because you do get into the workforce and they're not going to teach you how to
Right.
do
Well,
different things on Word most times.
right. Well, and writing seems like one of those crossover skills that like professionally there is a
Yeah.
lot of value in being able to communicate things technically, but also in a way that's easily digestible. But personally, it's good to know how to write.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
great individual skill to be
Yeah.
able to sit in front of a computer or sit in front of pen and paper and put things down in a way that's coherent.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So with all these different like ones we've talked about, different development skills, would there be any that you should focus on, maybe if you're going towards academia or if you're going towards industry?
Oh yeah, great question. So I think again there are some that are toe the line between them both, relevance in both. Writing certainly relevant to them both.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with a technical career that a PhD holder would go into where writing isn't relevant at all.
Mm-hmm.
I can see not writing full length scientific papers. I don't do that in my job, but being able to write in some capacity, very relevant, and being able to read others writing and digest the science portion, also very relevant. For academic oriented jobs, teaching is huge. Again, a lot of students, I think, not all, but a lot, go into academic jobs because they like the research, but also could be because they love to teach.
Yeah.
But learning to teach and teaching certificate programs are often not a core part of a grad program. It's the assumption is, again, this idea that like the teaching aspect is a smaller part on the side. You'll figure it out as you go, whereas the research is critically important. That feeling bothers me. I really only want. I can't design and redesign academia myself, but I really kind of only want people teaching that want to teach, because I
Yes.
think you get a lot more out of it. I don't know what that looks like. That's above my pay grade, I think, but learning to teach is critically important if you are going to be educating students, undergrad and
Mm-hmm.
grad. Also on the academic side, I mean, any technical skills that could be relevant for your future career as a postdoc, as a professor. Yeah, I mean, again, the baseline qualification is the degree,
Yeah.
and the things that are going to get you an academic job. On top of, did you graduate from a prestigious lab and how many papers did you publish, is like, what can you do?
Yeah.
How how can I use you, frankly? Like
Yeah.
what are you
Yep.
capable of? On the professional side, there's so many different things, and I'm also only thinking in the like pretty small worldview of like engineering and
Right.
particularly like health science engineering, not so much other engineering disciplines. There's a ton that PhDs can do
Yes.
that aren't academia, and so I think each of them has some things that are important. If you're going to go into consulting, it's important to understand how a business works. That's not something you learn how to evaluate in grad school.
That's such a
It's
good point. Yeah. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, if you're going into a consulting job with a PhD, not always, but often the case that you'll be put on some cases that like they're asking for your science background,
Yeah.
but not always. And you can't only be the science expert. You also need to understand like what makes this company profitable, what
Yeah.
doesn't make, how will this company crash and burn, right?
Yeah.
If you're going into government and government research, you need to understand medical devices, the different regulatory pathways for those devices. Like again, things that are not almost ever talked about during grad program, but
Right.
again, hugely important in commercialization. When I'm in my job, I'm directing a medical device accelerator program, which means that I help scientists that have ideas for new devices, like basically learn how to build a company and learn how to develop that device through, ideally commercialization stage. all of the things that helped me and have continued to help me in that job were things I developed outside of my grad program.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like, well, I guess did it take a lot of extra hours on your end to devote to those types of things, or were they kind of things you picked up along the way? And
yeah, I think it depends on really what you're looking to get out of it. If for example, one of the things I do just as a little bit of a passion project is coach professionally. I do some leadership and career coaching. The ability to do that as a certified coach took a while. It was, I think, maybe almost 200 hours or so of between education and actual coaching practice. But it was worth it to me because that's something I wanted to continue to do in my whole career. But if I just wanted to do a little bit of learning here and there about, maybe I want to learn about emotional intelligence, maybe I want to learn about how to give critical feedback, there are ways to take, you can take classes online that are only a couple of hours here or there. Consulting, another great example. A lot of universities now have a consulting club. It's, again, what you choose to put into it. If you just kind of want to learn the basics of how a business works and you don't really crucially want a career in consulting, you can spend a couple hours a week with a case textbook or just going to meetings, and often you'll pick it up that way. If you're really serious about consulting, a few months before your interviews, you're going to have to take a deep dive and really practice casing and learning how businesses work. And I know, as a dismay to a lot of engineers and scientists, there's tons of math, and you have to be able to figure out how all of these things work. Writing coaching, same thing. I just really, with no formal experience, went to the writing center and said, hey, here are my things that I've done before. I'm passionate about helping this. Will you take me on and let me coach other students? It was kind of as I wanted to do it. I think I coached for maybe 3 hours a week. And 1 week or 2 weeks, not that big of a deal, but I did it for 3 years. And, I feel very much qualified to continue to do that work professionally now.
And it's kind of with writing, it's like a practice makes perfect. I look back on my undergrad theses and I'm like, what was I thinking here? Why weren't there more edits? but obviously right. I now see the progress that I've come through, and that's all professional and personal development aims for, is just to better yourself.
Right. And I think, again, I would avoid the feeling or maybe avoid the urge to do something because I didn't have a lot of free time in grad school. I had enough free time to do the things I wanted to do that were really important to me. Or I guess a different way of phrasing that is I made time for those things, but only the things that I knew I needed to make time for it. I can't do everything other than my research, right? At some point, the research has to get done. And I think that that's totally fair. That's ultimately what you're getting your degree for, is the research that you're working on for your PhD or for your master's in some cases. But I also wouldn't stray to the other extreme and feel like this is all I'm allowed to do or all that I should be doing. Because I think that sets you up at such a different starting point than some of the other folks that have done other things. There's a, asterisk of is that fair? And, some labs or some research groups are very supportive of outside activities and some aren't. And that is a very important conversation that, we're not really super touching on here, but at the end of the day, you are kind of responsible for your own career development. And it's got to be, it has to be a priority for you because it won't be for anybody else. As
a little personal anecdote here, I spent a summer doing some research with an ecologist, environmental research, and throughout that whole summer, 4 months worth, I used the program R Studio. I got very, very good at it, but that's because I had 4 months of training and very intensive. I knew I had to know what I was doing, but I was also getting paid to do that. So it was great. But now in my grad school, there's a lot of people just kind of trying to learn it because they know that it's probably going to be important as some type of geoscientist, environmental scientist. and they're like, how can you do all these things? And I'm like, I literally was paid for 4 months to do this.
Right.
I hope I know what I'm doing.
Right.
But it's not as easy to just pick up some types of programs, and you have to, like, it's a lot of personal time that you're putting into that stuff. So is it something you just kind of want to dabble in, or do you want to just kind of spend a few hours learning it? Because you could learn a lot on certain programs, just in a couple hours too. But so I think it's important not to compare your developments to other people's as well.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to, what are you hoping to get out of it? Right.
Yeah.
So one example that I have is, I did some short-term, like, startup science consulting for a nonprofit in the town. A lot of that experience is what was relevant in my job search, and kind of really gave me credibility when I went to apply for the job I have now. But again, what was my goal with that? I wasn't necessarily looking to be a full-time consultant. It was more about, I'm not getting the business and like other associated concern aspects about healthcare and about medical science from my grad program. I'm not. It's not designed for that, and that's okay. But I want those things because that's the career field that I want to work in. So I needed to spend enough time doing that outside activity to where I felt confident, like, I am relatively knowledgeable about this subject. I don't need to be an expert. Again, my first focus has to be my PhD work. Otherwise, I shouldn't be in the program. So I can't spend, a full-time employee's worth of work on that other stuff, but I do need to spend enough time to where I feel like I'm capable. For me, that looked like over the course of a couple of years, I think 3 or 4 times I had 6 or 8 weeks where 10 hours a week I was doing a side project. That's not always feasible for everyone. And for me, in fact, there were times where that wasn't feasible and I didn't sign on for a project during those times. Same thing with coaching. It took, I think, like I said, a couple hundred hours altogether, but that was spread out over 1.5 years. And I was able to get, okay, I have an 8-hour block here that I can do 8 hours. I only have 3 or 4 1-hour blocks here and here that I'm just, slowly adding up over time. And in both of those cases, I feel like I did enough to where it was, got me to the end goal that I wanted to get to.
Cool. I like that. So if people are kind of just wanting to dip their toes into the realm of professional personal development, because we say start as soon as possible, but how do you start that? What are kind of like your top 3 picks of like one each of a personal and professional development that you would recommend someone to start with? Sure.
So again, I think it's going to depend on what you want to do.
It's a very personal, it is like a very personal thing as well.
Yeah, sure. So let's see, I'll try to get through some maybe high key points that make sense. If you're looking to go into a academic teaching career, whether research or not, I think a teaching program of some type is maybe not a necessity, but certainly a bump. Again, it says something to be able to say, I'm looking to do either a researching and lecture or lecture only position. And I have been trained in how to teach other people. I've been trained in proper pedagogy and not just, I'm reading from slides. If you're going into an industry, so that's an example of mostly professional development. If you're going into an industry career, and by industry, I mean anything that's not academia, learning a bit about how companies work is crucial. I think there's such an interesting divide between academia and non-academia that a lot of things that happen in companies, both good and bad, you never learn about it until you're at your first job.
And you don't know until you don't know.
Right, exactly. You're in your job, and a great example is, I was kind of financially minded, and I have been this whole time. And my wife went from undergrad into her career directly, right, and then went back for MBA later. So I've understood this whole time how things work. But I know when I was talking to some of friends in my grad program, or when I did a episode with a personal finance podcast recently, a common thing is grad students will get into their first job and they're like, okay, how do I set up my health insurance to deduct from my paycheck, and what's retirement, and how do I save for it, and what is vacation time, and personal and sick leave.
Why don't we ever learn these things?
Exactly. And those are things that learning about how businesses work through some outside activities is going to help you. It can only help you. So that's not really, I guess, not a specific example. If you're looking to do something outside of academia, look for clubs on campus that are related to outside of academia things. So as an example, consulting clubs are really common, becoming increasingly more common depending on where you are. Again, writing centers are huge. I think either academia or industry, learning how to write and also learning to coach others on their own writing, super helpful, not ever going to hurt. I'm going to probably shy away from like research specific things just because like I think that's a little bit more clear cut in how to get that type of experience. Again, something that I really benefited from was a like leadership coaching institute. Those are pretty rare, admittedly. I was very lucky to go to a school that has one. It has kind of colored the rest of my career, honestly. But a lot of schools do have some type of additional training programs on campus for a variety of topics. They can be certificate programs. They can be like more in my wheelhouse, coaching and training and teaching programs. And a lot of them are available for free. Not all, but a lot. That's crucial. Also, don't be afraid to go to your like local career center. I know that it can be sometimes hit or miss for grad students just because there's still this assumption of like, oh, you're just going to go into academia. Like we don't need to really do that. But I think that's going away. And I really got a lot out of going to my career center, not just like as a graduating, fifth year PhD, but even my first year, because they helped me with, okay, let's maybe get you connected with some alumni. Can you, sorry, that's another great point. Find the alumni from your lab, not just from your program, but from your lab specifically. All of the things that I was involved in grad school originally came as a tip from somebody that was older than me, whether they had graduated already or whether, a fifth year, the consulting program, a fifth year grad student said, hey, I think you might be interested in this. Why don't you join? Done. The coaching program, a third year grad student says, I'm really enjoying this. I think you should try it. Done. Right. So like these, like wealth of knowledge in the I think older years of your program are really there to be talked to. And I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but like I loved getting the opportunity to talk to some younger students and kind of guiding them, or at least just telling them my experience with some things. And, as same thing now as a career professional, if there are students in my former lab that are like, hey, what do I do? Happy to help, like, give me a call. Right. So I think talking to people is also just huge.
Yes. We're just talking about this on a different podcast, but talking about networking and connecting to people who may or may not help you. Like, it's just nice to have connections. And whether you're planning to stay in the academic realm or whether you're wanting to go out other ways. I also think conferences, as intimidating as they could be, and I think they're a really great way to just kind of get a feel for like other things people are doing. And one thing that I did during grad school was I helped plan like just a student conference, and getting involved with that taught me like leadership skills, training with people of different personalities. But it also gave me a lot of professional development with like contacting alumni or other speakers and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of different joining an organization. Were you part of any like student clubs or student organizations?
I was, yeah. So the first couple of years, first years out, the second and third year of my PhD program, I was in my department's grad student association.
Okay.
So I did, I hosted social events for them, but also planned, there's an annual symposium every year, and the person in the 2 vice president seats plan that together. Similar kind of thing. I was responsible for building this entire program, inviting alumni speakers to come out and, talk to the students. A lot of event planning. My fourth year, I was the VP of finance for like the university-wide GSA.
Wow.
So really leaned heavily into like my financial background and just interest in that. Planned all kinds of events and fun things for grads. As I said, I was in a nonprofit program outside of campus for some science consulting that has really grown into a business that provides, experienced consulting for startups in town. And then again, the leadership program I was a part of, not really a club per se, but tons of students continue to get involved with that. Something I think also that should be said is there's like those resources aren't all going to be the same everywhere, but there is a shared piece of like there is something everywhere. And whether it's your writing center, whether it's a coaching institute, whether it's another student club. I know a lot of students at my campus were very involved in other like small student associations. There was, my campus alone, there were a lot of ethnic and affinity groups associations, a gaming association if you're really into board and video games, consulting clubs. There were a couple of professional development organizations. Just like go on the grad student website part of your university and find out what the couple hundred clubs are, and just see if
like even being part of a gaming club, you have to contact students, you have to contact other people, you have to organize things. Like those are all just little things that you don't really think about until you're in a new job position and you have to organize a luncheon and you don't know where to start. Like,
well, and something else that was so interesting for me is like, again, this speaks to some things we're probably not going to talk about today, but like I craved my things I was doing outside of research.
Same.
They were as much a development opportunity for me as they were like frankly a lifeline in terms of getting out of my lab and getting frankly out of my own head. So maybe that's a little bit of the personal element too, is like I don't want to be all research, and I loved going to these other things.
Yeah, no, that's the exact same with me. As I enjoyed having something outside of university that was still like a development factor, not just like an extracurricular activity, but I was still using energy and my brain to like make these choices and stuff. But then I also had like my extracurriculars as well. So it's different for everyone. But so last question. We did already talk about like resources, but can you think of like any other specific resources that you could share with the listeners about where to find these developmental opportunities? Yeah,
let's do maybe a rapid fire kind of deal. I think your university's grad student website portal is huge. A lot of universities have a alumni portal of some kind. You can connect with alumni either directly through that portal, or you can get connected through the different grad programs. Your lab's alumni are often easy to find on LinkedIn. We haven't talked about LinkedIn except for networking, but like hugely relevant for just getting in touch with people. Writing center on campus, career center on campus. I think any of your student clubs, even like I mentioned, as part of the Grad Student Association, that website is going to have, if it exists, a list of all of the other student clubs that are involved there. I think that's another great place to look. If your department has a student association, not all of them do, but if they do, great place. Again, those officers are going to be among the most knowledgeable people in your department because that's their job. And again, the last thing I would think of is, depending on the culture of your research program and the culture of your lab, your PI may be very knowledgeable about some things to do. Again, I know we talked about it's maybe not always in the PI's interest to hook you up with a bunch of really cool things that aren't research. But I think that culture is starting to change a little bit. And I've heard of some students that have gotten really awesome opportunities that aren't related to their research from their PI, saying, oh, you seem interested in this. I know Dr. So-and-so, they're doing this kind of thing. Do you want to do it? Yeah. So again, I think it's testing the waters and seeing where it goes. You mentioned conferences. That's another good example. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually one of my supervisors was just mentioning this to our lab group the other day, is that he's very supportive of things that make you a better student. So if it's a technical workshop that you want to attend, if there's a writing workshop you need to attend, like, if it costs a little bit of money, he would be willing to, supply that for you, or at least partial, and everything's online, it seems still.
Yeah.
So for the most part, it's like much more accessible than
Right.
like having to travel and front costs and everything. So I think it's really important to talk to your supervisors as well and see maybe they have some workshops that they've done in the past, or even like sharing resources that they've accumulated over time, like leadership skills and stuff. One thing I also wanted to mention, I was able to do like a guest presentation for a class one day because
Cool.
it was my supervisor, and he was giving a talk kind of specifically about what I study. So I was like, yeah, like sign me up. This is some good opportunity to talk
definitely.
to public speaking, but then also like be able to share my stuff with the group. And then I also wanted to give a not so shameless plug, or a shameless plug about PhD Balance. We do have a resources page on PhD Balance. It is currently in the works, in progress, but we do have an academic success resources page that needs a little bit more work to it, I think, but we'll be kind of populating it with some stuff there. We also have a BIPOC resources for different information about enrollment practices and financial resources, and also an QIA plus resource page. So if anyone's looking for some additional resources in personal development, there is some stuff on there as well. And I think overall, it sounds like professional development is very like personal and very diverse for the type of program you're in and stuff. So you might have to do your own research, but okay. So before we finish up, Sean, is there anything else you'd like to mention or talk about for today?
It's funny. The only thing that I think we really haven't talked about, and I didn't think about it until you just started mentioning the PhD Balance website as a resource. When I was in undergrad, I didn't know about and I had a Twitter, like a personal Twitter, but I didn't know about this whole like academic social media space. Like that wasn't a thing, right? It existed, but I just wasn't a part of it. I didn't know. And I really didn't even figure it out until halfway through grad school. And now I'm seeing, I obviously found PhD Balance, found a lot of these other either accounts, whether private or not, podcasts and websites of like, there's this entire community of people online that are literally dying for you to ask them a question.
Yes.
And like, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any clue. I had a lot of really supportive mentors and people that guided me, through the steps up through, I would say maybe the first year of grad school, before I really figured out, all of these other people are here and they're all hugely important. So yeah, it's like not so shameless plug. Like I am very open and willing to have people reach out to me. That's a great thing. But like, there's literally millions of people that are just in a similar boat as you, or have recently been in the same boat as you, and are very happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, very willing to help because they know the pain that students are going through. All right. Well, thank you, Sean, so much. So this has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. Grad Chat episodes are now posted simultaneously on our podcast and YouTube channel Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information about Grad Chat or PhD Balance, check out phdbalance.com and follow PhD Balance on Twitter and Instagram at PhD_balance. Until next time, bye.